Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight, you're not a soldier, a scholar, or a saint. You're something far more delicate and far more broken. You're a castrato, which means you are adored, applauded, and mutilated beyond repair. Your voice is divine. Your life is not. You were chosen young, sliced into perfection before you understood what was being taken. Now you live in a golden world of candle-lit opera houses, jewelled robes, and endless praise. But none of it is yours. You don't grow old the way others do. You don't love the way others can. You exist in a beautiful, horrifying prison, and the key was thrown away the moment they called you special. So before your larynx warms up, your posture stiffens, and your body remembers what was stolen, do me a favour. Leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. If you want to unlock early access, get ad-free audio of these episodes, or just support the show, there's a Patreon link in the description. But for now, lie back, get comfortable. Let's begin. You're born in a place that doesn't matter, a village tucked into the folds of rural Italy, stone-walled, sun-bleached, and perpetually behind on everything but faith. The houses are low, the seasons predictable, and the church bells loud enough to tell you when to work, pray, and die. Your family's poor, but not theatrically so. Just the regular kind, threadbare sleeves, thin soups, and too many mouths for too little bread. There's nothing exceptional about you, not at first. Just another boy in a countryside, full of them, with mud on your ankles and a scrap of song always tumbling out of your mouth. Your mother calls your voice sweet. Your grandmother calls it a gift. The priest calls it useful. You don't yet know that when grown men use words like that about children, it rarely ends well. All you know is that when you sing, people stop to listen. They smile. Sometimes they cry. Sometimes they press coins into your father's hand after Mass and say things like, "He has the voice of an angel," which you think is a good thing, until you notice that your parents never smile when they hear it. They start taking you to church more often. Not just on Sundays, but Tuesdays, Thursdays, whenever the priest can be convinced to unlock the side door. You're given extra chores to build discipline, extra prayers to keep you humble, and extra beatings to remind you that your voice doesn't belong to you. It belongs to God, and to the people who pay him rent. You learn Latin phonetically, not because you're educated, but because the hymns require it. You start to recognize the difference between admiration and expectation. At first, you think it's nice to be important. Eventually, you learn it means you're no longer allowed to make mistakes. You can't miss a note, you can't get sick, and you definitely can't grow up. You're 7 when the first stranger visits the village. He isn't dressed like anyone you know. His cloak is too fine, his shoes too clean, and his smile too thin. He listens to you sing behind the altar and says very little afterward. But later, you see your father speaking to him behind the olive press. No one tells you what's discussed, but that night, your mother holds you longer than usual before bed. She doesn't say anything either. The adults start whispering more, not outright lying, just circling around words like opportunity and sacrifice and blessing. You ask what's happening, and someone tells you not to worry, that it's for your future, that you're lucky, which as it turns out is just a village way of saying something awful is coming and there's nothing you can do about it. You overhear enough to know you're being prepared. For what? You're not entirely sure. Something prestigious? Something holy? Something unnatural? Your voice is the key, they say. The proof. You want to ask? The proof of what? That God loves you? Or that he's willing to take things from you, just to make a point? You start noticing how differently people look at you. The old women pinch your cheeks harder, like they're testing the firmness of fruit. The priest touches your shoulder, a little too long, when he corrects your posture. Your friends stop inviting you to play, and not because they don't like you, but because they're already being taught that you aren't quite like them anymore. You've been singled out, touched by something. Blessed or cursed, it's hard to tell. Either way, you're being slowly removed from the world of boys and placed into something else, something lonelier. One evening, while washing your feet by the fire, you ask your grandmother if angels ever get scared. She looks at you for a long time before saying, "Only the ones who know what's coming." Then she ruffles your hair and says no more. It's not all grim, of course. There are moments when you believe the dream they keep feeding you, that you'll sing for kings, dine on silver, sleep on velvet, that your name will echo through the marble halls of Rome like incense through a chapel. And maybe it will, but you're too young to understand the cost. Not just the physical one, that will come later, but the one you're paying now, slowly, in whispers and rehearsals and the soft corrosion of childhood. You're no longer allowed to simply be, you must become. Your voice gets higher, purer, otherworldly, they say, and with every note you perfect, you drift further from the kind of boy who might climb trees or scuff his knees. You start holding your hands the way the choir master does, delicate, deliberate. You walk with shoulders back, chest lifted, chin tucked, like your body is an instrument you've been warned never to drop. You don't remember when you stopped playing. You just know you can't anymore. Then one day, without explanation, your father tells you to pack your best shirt. You're going on a journey. You don't ask where. You already know better than to ask questions that make adults uncomfortable. You just nod like a good boy and tuck the shirt into your satchel. It doesn't fit anymore. You've grown, but not in the way that matters. The next morning, your mother kisses your forehead and says, "Be brave." Your father doesn't say anything. He just takes your hand, and together you walk down the dirt path that leads away from the village, past the mill, past the goats, past the life you thought you'd live. You don't cry, not because you're strong, but because you've already learned something most children haven't. Sometimes crying doesn't change anything. You don't know where you're going, but you're starting to understand what you're being taken toward. A future where your body's no longer yours. Your voice is everyone's, and your name might be remembered, if only as a footnote in someone else's glory. And whether that's a miracle or a sentence, well, that's not up to you. Not anymore. The road is longer than you expected. Your father doesn't say much as you walk beside him. He points out landmarks you already know, as though they're new. The river bend where someone drowned. The tree stump where a fox was once trapped. The shrine to St. Cecilia, where your mother lit a candle the day your voice first made someone cry. You don't ask where you're going. You already know the answer will be vague, softened by words like treatment or opportunity or God's will. What you don't know is that this will be the last time you see most of these places as a child. When you return, if you return, you'll be something else. You arrive in a town larger than yours, with brick buildings and a smell that bites your nose. Horse dung, smoke, and unfamiliar perfume. The house you're led into is tall and narrow. It has too many windows and not enough warmth. A woman opens the door, looks you over like she's buying meat, and nods without smiling. You're given a room, a bed, and a bowl of broth too salty to finish. That night, you sleep poorly under a quilt that smells of someone else's sweat and something sharper, something medicinal. The next morning you're washed, not gently. 2 women scrub you with sour soap and cold water, speaking to each other in quick, clipped tones. One of them touches your arm and says, "He's small enough." That's good. You don't ask what that means. You just nod, as you've been taught to do. That's the safest thing now. Nod, smile, obey. If you pretend not to notice what's happening, maybe it won't be real. Maybe you'll wake up at home. They give you wine, not a sip, a cup. It burns going down and leaves your stomach warm and dizzy. You're told it's for courage. You want to be brave, but your body feels loose, like your limbs have forgotten how to hold themselves together. You try to ask a question, just one, but the words catch in your throat. No one answers. One of the women smiles at you with pity. The other doesn't look at you at all. You're taken to a back room. It's dim, lit by a single oil lamp and the slanted light of morning through dirty shutters. The walls are plain wood, scratched and stained. The floor is covered with a sheet that used to be white. The table in the centre isn't a bed. It isn't even a real table, just a plank balanced between two stools. But you're lifted onto it anyway, gently, like a lamb being moved to slaughter. The man who enters doesn't introduce himself. He doesn't need to. He has a surgeon's apron and a priest's silence. His hands are clean. His face is not. He smells of cloves and sweat, and something underneath, like iron. He nods at the women. They hold your arms. You try to speak. The wine has dulled your mouth. You hear the clink of metal and the soft, final sound of a door being latched. You don't remember the worst part. That's one of the few mercies. Later, you'll recall flashes, a sharp sound, a cold pressure, the feeling of being very far away from your own body. You'll remember screaming without knowing when you started. You'll remember a wetness that didn't stop. But the actual moment, the before becomes after, is mercifully gone. Your mind had the sense to retreat, even if your body could not. When you wake, you're in a different room. It's dark, warm, and close, like a closet. You're lying on something padded but damp. The air smells like lavender oil, vinegar, and blood. Your legs hurt. Not a sharp pain, but a deep throbbing ache that makes your stomach twist. You try to move, and the pain spikes. You whimper. You don't cry properly. Your throat feels swollen, your eyes too dry. The whimper is all you can manage, and no one comes. Eventually, someone opens the door. A hand places a cloth on your forehead. It's soaked in something cool and sour. Another hand lifts your head and offers you broth again. You sip without thinking. You have no strength left to refuse anything. The woman says, "There now. It's done." She says it the way one might speak of pruning a tree. Quick, necessary, unremarkable. When you're strong enough to sit up, they let you see the bandages. You don't want to, but they insist. You need to know how to care for yourself, the woman says. You look. You immediately wish you hadn't. There's blood, stitching, absence. You don't fully understand what's been done, only that something is missing. Something you hadn't thought could be taken. They tell you it was for your health, a medical necessity, a hernia repair perhaps, or a growth that needed removing. You nod because arguing doesn't make it untrue, but you know what really happened. You know because your body feels different, foreign, like a song in the wrong key. You know because you can't stand without assistance. You know because your voice is still high, and now it always will be. Your father returns a few days later. He doesn't look at you directly. He signs some paper, hands over something you don't see, and thanks the doctor without emotion. When you ask to go home, he hesitates. Soon, he says, "First we need to get you stronger. You'll have new teachers now, better ones." You don't ask what he means. You already suspect you've been enrolled in something you never applied for. You leave the town, in a wagon this time. You don't walk. You couldn't if you wanted to, as the road winds away from the place where you stopped being a child. You watch the trees pass and try to hum a song you used to love. The sound comes out clear, steady, angelic. The kind of voice people would pay to hear. You stop humming. The silence is easier. And somewhere deep in your body, a new kind of quiet has settled in. A knowing, dense and unmovable. You're no longer a boy, not exactly. You're a creation now, a promise carved into flesh. A voice separated from the natural order, preserved in amber, sharp and unnatural. You were told it was for your health. You were told you're lucky. You were told you'll be famous one day. But what no one told you, what no one will ever say out loud, is that this was not a gift. It was an agreement, and your body signed it in blood. They call it a conservatorio, and the word sounds elegant, musical even, like a place where genius is protected and nurtured. You imagine something bright and spacious, filled with gentle instructors and the sound of harps. But when you arrive, it's just a building, a big one, stone-faced and severe, hunched between two churches like a secret neither one wants to claim. The inside smells like lye, candle wax and boiled cabbage. The walls are tall but blank, lined with crucifixes and silence. A boy coughs somewhere down the corridor, and it echoes like a warning. You're not the only one here. The other boys are all your age or close. They don't smile. They don't ask your name. They've already learned there's no point. Most of them wear the same expression you do, confused, guarded, and vaguely ashamed of something no one's allowed to mention out loud. Your voice is still healing, but they make you sing anyway. A teacher listens with half-lidded eyes, nods, and writes something down in a ledger. You're given a cot, a chipped bowl, and a robe that smells faintly of damp linen and fear. There is no free time, only scheduled time and unspoken expectations. Your days begin before dawn, always with cold water and forced prayer. Then come scales, ascending, descending, modulating, repeating. You practice breathing like it's a moral discipline. Shoulders down, ribs out, hold, release. Every part of your body is either being corrected or ignored. You sit with a book of Latin hymns until your eyes sting. Then stand and hold notes until your knees shake. If your posture slumps, they strike your lower back. Not hard, just enough to remind you who you're supposed to be. Meals are quiet, food is plain, bread with weak broth. Beans if you're lucky, sometimes you get fruit, but only after a performance. You eat quickly, because time is always running out. The teachers don't yell, but they don't need to. Their silence is worse, it's the kind that makes your stomach twist when you make a mistake. Not because you fear punishment, but because you fear being overlooked. The building itself is a paradox. The chapel is gilded, with carved angels and gold filigree. The windows are tall and stained with coloured saints. But your dormitory is bare, the walls chipped and damp in the corners. The floors creak underfoot. You learn to walk lightly, speak softly, breathe shallowly. The only softness in your world is your pillow, and even that smells of bleach and someone else's sweat. You clutch it at night, not for comfort, but to remind yourself you still have something to hold. There's a courtyard, but it isn't for playing. It's for posture drills. You walk in circles, balancing books on your head, while a tutor calls out corrections like he's announcing sins. Lift the chin, relax the jaw, engage the diaphragm. The human voice, you're told, is a sacred instrument, and you're now expected to treat your entire body as its fragile, temperamental casing. You're both tool and vessel, and tools, of course, do not ask questions. You learn quickly that everyone here shares the same secret, even if no one says it. You hear it in the sameness of their voices, unnaturally high, uncannily smooth. You see it in the way their bodies lag behind their years, in the smoothness of their cheeks, in the slight hesitations when someone mentions family. Some boys came willingly, others were offered, some were lied to. You don't talk about how it happened. You just share looks in the hallways, little nods, the quiet solidarity of the unchosen. The teachers call you by your surname or by a number, never by a nickname, never anything affectionate. When you sing well, you're praised in measured tones. Correct, acceptable, on pitch. When you falter, they start again from the beginning. Time means nothing here, except as a measure of how much progress you've made. How many arias you can memorize, how many breaths you can hold, how many seconds you can sustain a note without sounding human. Occasionally, patrons visit, men in fur-lined coats or velvet cassocks. They walk the halls with clasped hands and evaluate you like livestock. They don't speak to you directly, they speak to your instructors. That one has potential. Too breathy. Too old. You feel like a sculpture in mid-carving. Half finished, half owned. waiting for someone else to decide if you're worth the trouble. At night, you lie in your cot and stare at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of other boys not sleeping. You all breathe in rhythm, as if rehearsing for some choral performance no one will ever hear. You dream of home, but home is blurring. Your village feels like something you read about, not something you left. Your parents become silhouettes. Their faces fade, but their intentions linger. Eventually, the routine stops feeling foreign. You no longer think about the strangeness of it all. It becomes normal to rise in darkness, to sing until you're dizzy, to receive applause only when your silence is perfect. You find comfort in rules, because they at least make sense. The world out there is uncertain. In here, everything has a place, even if that place is somewhere between pupil and possession. Sometimes a boy disappears, sent off to sing for a noble house or dismissed without explanation. The cot is cleared, the robe taken. No one says goodbye. You learn not to ask where they went. You only pray quietly, selfishly, that when it's your turn, you're not sent back to where you came from. Because for all the discomfort, the cold, the silence, and the aching bones, you know one thing with absolute clarity. If you're going to suffer, it might as well be for something. For applause, for music, for glory, or at the very least for a reason someone might remember. And so you sing, every day, every hour, until your voice becomes not just something you use, but something you are. At some point, you stop recognizing your own voice. It slips away gradually, like warmth leaving your hands on a winter morning. You still hear it, of course, every day, echoing off stone chapel walls and polished rehearsal halls. But it doesn't feel like it belongs to you anymore. It's too big, too weightless, too detached. A sound that hovers above you instead of coming from inside. People call it a miracle. They say it brings them closer to heaven. You start to wonder if heaven feels like being hollow. Your range expands beyond reason. Notes stretch into places the body wasn't designed to reach. You are trained to sustain tones longer than most men can hold breath. You're taught to slide between registers like a bird diving through air, seamless and unnatural. Your instructors praise your control. Audiences later will marvel at your purity. But the word you keep coming back to, even if you never say it out loud, is impossible. The sound you produce doesn't belong to a child, or a man, or anyone real. It's something forged, bolted into place, through pressure and pain. You work harder than you thought a human voice could work. Breathing drills that leave you lightheaded. Posture corrections that bend your spine into impossible curves. You practice singing while lying flat to strengthen your diaphragm, then while kneeling to increase discipline. Your ribs begin to flare slightly, pushed outward by years of forced expansion. No one warns you this might make sleeping painful, or that it will eventually alter the way jackets fit across your torso. What matters is the sound. The shape of your body is simply an inconvenience on the way to perfection. You grow taller, but not older. Your face remains soft, boyish. Your limbs lengthen disproportionately, like branches on a tree too eager to stretch toward the sun. The other boys, those not like you, change in ways you never will. Their voices crack, deepen, settle into something familiar. They get scruff on their chins. They slouch. They complain about girls. You don't complain. You don't grow hair. Your voice floats, still high, still clean. You learn to keep your distance. Their laughter isn't meant for you anymore. You begin to notice how people look at you, the way their expressions flicker between awe and discomfort. They hear you sing, and their eyes widen. Some smile, some cross themselves, some stare too long, trying to piece you together. This voice, this body, this presence that doesn't fit cleanly into any known category. You're not cute. You're not handsome. You're not beautiful in any way that can be comfortably described. You're stylized, exaggerated, like a portrait painted in the wrong proportions, a divine error No one dares to question. Instructors stop treating you like a student and begin treating you like an investment. You are no longer told to improve. You are told to maintain, to protect, to rehearse carefully, to preserve what was given to you, by God or by a blade or by the quiet desperation of your parents. No one is entirely sure. Your voice has become sacred. Not in a spiritual sense, but in the museum sense. Fragile, revered, untouchable. You're not praised for effort anymore. You're praised for existing. You try not to resent the praise. You tell yourself this is what you were trained for. You perform arias that leave audiences in tears. Nobles rise from their chairs to applaud. Priests speak of you in hushed tones. You receive gifts, jewellery, perfumed letters, silk-lined gloves that will never feel right on your hands. But underneath it all, there is a stillness in you that refuses to move. It's not pride, it's not happiness, it's resignation, polished into performance. In private moments, when no one's listening, you try to speak your name aloud. Just your name. You want to hear what you sound like when you're not singing, but the voice that comes out is unfamiliar. Soft, high, carefully modulated, even in casual speech. Your training has made it so you can't even speak like a real person anymore. You've learned too well. Your voice doesn't crack, it doesn't break, it doesn't belong to you. Sometimes you remember what it felt like to run through the fields as a child, shouting nonsense, laughing until your throat ached. That kind of voice was free, alive, loud for the sake of being loud. Now your voice is never unintentional. It is placed, sculpted, held like a fragile ornament between your teeth. Even when you're angry, your tone remains precise. Even when you're lonely, it rings clear. You don't get to be raw, you get to be perfect. When you look in the mirror, you see someone who never quite arrived. A half-grown man with a boy's jawline and a courtier's poise. Your body is long, but not strong. Your shoulders narrow, your hips wide. You've read that eunuchs sometimes develop fat in strange places. You try not to think about that. You try not to think about anything that implies your body might be reshaping itself without your permission. Again, what no one explains is how deeply alien you begin to feel inside your own skin. You're praised for your voice, yes, but it lives inside a body that feels borrowed, something you've been asked to carry on behalf of others. No one ever says this, but you sense it. Your role is not to be anything. It is to sound like something. A boy preserved in amber, a ghost of purity, a living reliquary of music and sacrifice. And so, you sing. Because what else is there? You sing in the chapel. You sing on command. You sing to justify the knife. You sing so that no one asks too many questions about the past. You sing until people forget that you are a person and instead see only what they want to see. An angel in flesh. A miracle in silk. A cathedral made of breath. And in the silence between notes, you remind yourself that you're more than your voice, even if no one else remembers. Even if you're starting to forget it too. Your name begins to travel faster than your feet can. First within the walls of the conservatorio, then across city streets, and eventually into the drawing rooms of nobles who've never heard you but already pretend they have. You're summoned to sing at salons and cathedral feasts, ushered through side doors into candlelit halls where people speak in murmurs and drink from glasses thinner than your wrist. They smile as you enter and bow their heads when you open your mouth. Your voice silences entire rooms, but their silence is different from yours. Yours is required, theirs is indulgent. They pay in coin, in gifts, in favours wrapped in velvet pouches. You're no longer dressed by the conservatory staff. Tailors now measure your arms with gloved hands and whisper about silk weights and imported lace. You start wearing brocade coats that cost more than your father earned in a year. Rings appear on your fingers. Perfumed oils soak into your collars. You are made to look expensive because you are. Every part of you now gleams with borrowed wealth, and the quiet understanding that it can be taken away at any time. When you walk into a room, people stare. When you leave, they whisper. They always whisper. The compliments are loud. The laughter never is. You hear them behind their fans, behind their gloves, behind their polite nods. They praise your voice and then mock your gait. Your hips sway too much. Your hands rest too delicately. Your laugh, when you allow yourself to have one, is too light, too strange. You try to stand straighter, to stiffen your movements, to move like a man. But your body doesn't agree. It's grown long and curved and soft in ways that betray you. You learn how to perform off stage as well as on. You bow just enough to show humility, but not so much that you appear subservient. You speak in full sentences, but never too confidently. You smile often, but only in response to compliments, never unprompted. It becomes a dance, one where every movement is choreographed to reassure people that you are special, but not threatening. Beloved, but containable. Not quite man, not quite boy, and certainly not someone they need to treat like an equal. Your voice is your armour, but also your cage. It is the only reason you're here, the only reason they tolerate your presence in places meant for men with titles and women with dowries. And yet, the moment you stop singing, you feel the shift. Without your voice, you're strange, a walking contradiction draped in silk. You see it in their eyes, the discomfort, the unspoken question. What are you, really? You sing for bishops who won't look you in the eye afterward. You perform for duchesses who press handkerchiefs to their cheeks as you sing, then press them back into their sleeves the moment you finish. Like emotion is something to be politely tucked away. Sometimes you see pity, sometimes admiration, often both, layered together like old paint, never quite covering what lies beneath. They want your beauty, your talent, your impossible sound, but not your presence. You start to understand the bargain. It was never about music, not really. It was about transformation, about taking something raw and natural and shaping it into a marvel. You are the marvel. You are the evidence that pain properly managed can become art. People don't applaud because you moved them. They applaud because you proved that the system works. You were cut open, hollowed out, and now you sing like a seraph. They clap because it justifies everything. You try not to hate them for it. After all, they pay you, they dress you, they invite you back. But the applause doesn't follow you out of the room. On the carriage ride home, you sit with your hands folded neatly, staring at the lamplight flickering across the window. You think about the aria they begged you to encore. You think about how they stood and shouted your name. And you think about the footman who winced when he saw you climb the steps like he was embarrassed on your behalf. At night, you undress slowly, carefully, as if the fabric might bruise. You hang up your coat, you wipe the powder from your face, you wash your hands twice, and then you look at yourself in the mirror and try to find the person they were applauding. He's not there, not really, just a figure made of skin and practice and other people's wishes. Sometimes you imagine what it would be like to be ordinary, to walk down the street unnoticed, to eat without being observed, to open your mouth and let a voice come out that no one had altered. You're not ungrateful. At least you try not to be. You know what your life could have been. You've seen it in the faces of the boys who weren't chosen. But knowing that doesn't make this easier. It only makes it harder to complain. You've become something rare, precious, unnatural. You're both adored and unmaimed, celebrated and scrutinized. They call you divine, but no one touches you. They lift their glasses when you enter the room, but you're never invited to sit. You've been made into a symbol of beauty, of sacrifice, of control, and symbols don't get to have complaints. And so you smile, you bow, you sing, you accept the applause with grace, and each time you wonder what part of yourself you're trading for it. Because it's never free. It's never just about the music. It's about becoming something they can point to and say, look what we made him into. And the price for that kind of praise is never paid just once. Puberty passes you by like a guest who forgot to knock. It doesn't arrive late, it simply doesn't arrive at all. Other boys swell with muscle and voice and hair. Their features sharpen. Their bodies take on a kind of density, a gravity you no longer recognize. You, on the other hand, keep floating. Your face stays smooth, your skin soft. Your limbs lengthen unevenly, giving you the look of someone not quite finished, like a sketch someone abandoned halfway through. You're stretched out and incomplete, a figure caught in the middle of becoming something that never comes. Your hips widen subtly at first, then more noticeably. Your chest stays flat, but your bones shift under the skin in unfamiliar ways. Your voice, of course, remains unchanged. High, pure, unshakable. You have the lung capacity of a grown man and the vocal timbre of a child. This might make sense to the audiences who cry when you sing, who tell you that angels must sound like you, that you've been blessed beyond understanding. But to you, it feels like being locked in the wrong body, day after day, with no key and no instructions. In mirrors, you look less like a person and more like a silhouette, too fluid to be masculine, too tall to be childlike. You've outgrown boyhood without ever arriving at manhood, and now you exist in a space that has no name. You become something people notice but can't define, admire but don't approach. They stare at you the way people stare at wax figures. Fascinated, unsettled, always from a distance. You're a curiosity, a spectacle, a work of art carefully sculpted and gently horrifying. You begin to notice how other people notice you, not with attraction, not exactly, with hesitation, with uneasy admiration. You catch it in their eyes. They want to look away, but they don't. They try to smile, but their brows don't quite relax. You are not a threat. You are not a prize. You are a question that nobody wants to answer. Women avoid standing too close to you. Men speak to you with exaggerated politeness, as if unsure whether they should shake your hand or offer you a seat. Everyone seems to be trying to solve you without knowing what the puzzle is. Touch becomes a rarity. At first, this feels like respect. Later, it starts to feel like avoidance. People greet you without contact, compliment you without warmth. Even those who dress you, your tailors, your handlers, move you like glass. They button your cuffs and adjust your collar without meeting your eyes. You begin to realize that while your voice invites intimacy, your presence creates distance. You are loved in the abstract, appreciated in theory, but no one reaches for you. No one holds your hand without a reason. You become cautious with your own body. You move precisely. You learn to occupy space delicately, never sprawling, never slouching. You cross your legs carefully. Hold your hands with intention. Avoid the kinds of gestures that would imply you belong to the ordinary world. Even your sleep posture becomes rehearsed. You don't want to look grotesque, even in private, because someone somewhere is always watching. If not with their eyes, then with their expectations. The other singers change too, not just physically. Their jokes shift, their eyes shift, their interests turn toward pleasures you were never trained for. You laugh when they laugh, but the punchlines rarely land. You nod at the right moments, but the conversations wash over you like foreign songs, recognizable in tone, meaningless in content. They start to date, to drink, to disappear into alleys and re-emerge tousled and triumphant. You don't join them. No one suggests that you should. Sometimes one of them will ask, with something like pity in their voice, what it's like. Not the surgery, that subject is avoided, but the after, the existence, what it's like to be you. You never have an answer. You just shrug and say something vague about discipline or focus, because the truth is, you don't know how to explain what it feels like to be untouchable in every sense of the word. Desired only in pieces, heard but never held. You try not to think about desire at all. Not yours, not anyone else's. It becomes easier that way. You focus on technique, performance, delivery. You tell yourself that the body is secondary to the voice. That craving touch is a weakness. that you've been chosen for something higher. But sometimes, when the day is long and the applause is still ringing in your ears, you wonder what it would be like to be wanted not for how you sound, but for who you are, if anyone even knows anymore. At night, you lie awake in a bed softer than most people will ever sleep in, surrounded by silence that's supposed to feel peaceful. You stare at the ceiling and count your blessings like you were taught to do. You count your gowns, your medals, your patrons. You count the people who say they love your voice. And then quietly, you count the people who have ever truly looked at you. The number is small, possibly 0. You are not a boy, you are not a man. You are a voice with a face, a song with legs, a mystery too fragile to touch. And that is how they like it. That is how they keep you beautiful, by making sure you never become real. So you keep singing, because that's what you're for. Because the only thing more terrifying than being what you are is what might happen if the music ever stopped. The first time you walk onto an opera stage, it feels like stepping into a hallucination. Everything is too grand to be real. Gilded balconies that climb like stacked thrones. Candlelit chandeliers that shimmer like captured stars. Velvet curtains thick enough to muffle a scream. You stand beneath the painted ceiling and think for just a moment that maybe all the pain was worth this. Then the music begins, and you're no longer yourself. You are the aria, the breath, the sound that bends the room into reverence. They love you. The audience erupts before your final note finishes vibrating in the rafters. They call your name with the kind of desperation usually reserved for saints and soldiers. You bow with practiced grace, eyes lowered just enough to look humble without seeming ashamed. But inside something twists, because this isn't love, it's hunger, beautiful, ravenous, and entirely impersonal. They don't know you. They know the voice, the figure, the illusion, and they want more of it. Your name is printed on posters now, in fonts thick with drama. It hangs outside the theatre, beside oil paintings of characters you will play again and again, until you start to lose track of which one is actually you. Inside, your dressing room overflows with offerings. Perfume bottles, embroidered gloves, sweets wrapped in gold foil. You receive fan letters that call you celestial, enchanting, unnatural. That last word appears more than once. You circle it with your thumb, as if that might make it disappear. The costumes are decadent, satin breeches, embroidered waistcoats, cloaks lined with fur and pearls. On stage, you wear crowns and swords. You sing lovers' duets with sopranos who never quite look you in the eye. The audience sees a prince, a warrior, a romantic lead, but backstage your presence is less welcomed. Tenors sneer, quietly resentful of how easily you command attention. Baritones nod at you with cold politeness, as if your presence offends some natural order they never agreed to break. There are jokes, of course, whispered during fittings, shared over wine, delivered with smiles too tight to be genuine. They gamble on which soprano you'll outshine next, which role will draw the loudest applause. Some say you're the best soprano they've ever heard, followed by a pause just long enough to remind you that you are, technically, not supposed to be one. You learn to laugh along. You learn not to flinch when the line between flattery and insult blurs. Women admire you openly, but at a distance. They compliment your voice, your elegance, your poise. They brush your arm in passing, but it never lingers. They call you darling, beautiful, divine. But they do not invite you into their carriages. They do not write the kind of letters that smell like longing. You are safe to adore because you're safely other. A man unthreatening, a woman unqualified. A third thing, exquisite and exempt. Someone they can praise without complication. The men, for their part, watch you with a different kind of scrutiny. Some with disgust, some with envy, a few with fascination that makes your skin itch. One patron stares so long during a performance that he forgets to applaud. Another sends you a gift, a lock of his hair tied in a ribbon. You begin to understand that admiration can bend in many directions. and not all of them are comfortable. You never know what people want from you, only that they want something. Backstage is a study in contrast. One room holds a feast, another a fistfight. Wardrobes clatter open, while someone sobs behind a locked door. Musicians argue over tempo. Singers pace like animals, in two small cages. The orchestra tunes with indifference as you stare into your mirror, adjusting a collar that costs more than your family's home. You touch your cheek, your lip, your throat. You try to remember what you looked like before all this, but the memory doesn't come. Each night, the opera begins again. You emerge in character, greeted by gasps and applause. You sing with perfect control, stepping through scenes of passion and betrayal that feel increasingly hollow. The crowd believes every note. They rise to their feet, crying out your name, like it belongs to them. And when the curtain falls, you bow. You bow like it's a ritual, like it will save you. Then you walk off stage and feel the applause leave your skin like heat from cooling embers. There are moments, brief, sharp, when you wonder if this is success or just another form of confinement. A prettier one, lined in silk and framed with gold, but a cage all the same. The conservatorio was strict, yes, but at least it was honest. This world is lined with compliments that sting, freedoms that aren't quite real. You are celebrated, yes, revered, but never embraced. Your fame is a spotlight you can't step out of, even when it burns. You try not to resent it. You tell yourself that everyone wears a mask here, that opera is built on illusion, that no one is truly themselves under the stage lights. But sometimes you watch the sopranos remove their wigs and sigh with relief. You watch the tenors punch each other on the shoulder and laugh. You watch the baritones kiss serving girls behind curtains. And you realise that they all get to return to themselves when the music ends. You don't. You leave the stage still in costume, even when the garments come off. Your posture stays too perfect, your voice too measured, your smile too fixed. You no longer know how to be unguarded. You've been performing for so long that even your silence has become rehearsed. And yet, you go on. Because what else is there? The applause may be shallow, but it's still louder than the quiets that came before. The costumes may itch, but they're softer than the robes of your youth. The admiration may be conditional, but it's better than being invisible. So you step back into the light, night after night, letting them love the version of you they paid to see. And somewhere between the velvet and the violence, you start to understand. The stage was never your escape. It was just the most beautiful prison yet. Adoration is not always a blessing. Sometimes it comes wrapped in silk and sealed with wax, scented with lavender and rose water, addressed in calligraphy, too ornate to be sincere. Your fan letters arrive in boxes now, dozens, then hundreds. They're stored in a side chamber near your dressing room, sorted by servant boys who've learned not to read them unless they want to blush for hours. Some are simple declarations of love. Others are poems, prayers, confessions. Some include hair, lace, bits of cloth dampened with tears, or something less easily named. One arrives containing a miniature painting of your mouth. Only your mouth. You don't ask what the sender meant by it. Nobles collect your likeness like saints collect relics. Engravings of your face hang in libraries and salons, always slightly exaggerated. Your skin glows too white, your jaw too sharp. Your eyes carry a gleam that never appears in mirrors. In some, your hair has been painted longer than it is. In others, they've given you wings. The artists aren't interested in accuracy. They're painting a myth. You are not you. You are the embodiment of an idea, a fantasy, a question people can hang on a wall and admire from a distance. You receive marriage proposals from women you've never met. They arrive with family crests and florid handwriting, declaring their willingness to overlook your condition in exchange for the privilege of being near your genius. One baroness offers her entire dowry, provided you agree never to live in the same house. Some don't even pretend it's about love. They want to be seen beside you. to walk into rooms with your arm hooked through theirs, basking in your beauty, like moonlight stolen from another sky. Others want to own you outright, like a rare gem or an imported bird, something to display, something that sings. The men are no better, many are worse. They approach with gifts, compliments, eyes just a little too wide. They call you unique, exquisite, not like other men, not like women either. They ask questions they pretend are polite. What kind of clothes you prefer, what kind of sleep you get, how it feels to sing so high for so long. One man, a cardinal's cousin, sends a sonnet comparing your lungs to cathedral arches. Another, less subtle, simply sends you a list of imagined scenarios, detailed, graphic, signed only with the letter M. You burn that one, but not before reading it twice. Everyone wants to know what you are, not who. That question faded long ago. They want a category, a word they can use without choking. Some call you divine, some call you monstrous. Some insist you're the future of art. Others mutter that you're a cautionary tale wrapped in velvet. You're not offended by any of it. You've stopped expecting to be understood. But the need in their eyes, that still stings. Because it's not about knowing you. It's about claiming a piece of something no one else can have. You learn how to perform off stage more meticulously than ever. Every gesture must be graceful, every word enigmatic. You're expected to be aloof, but never rude, warm but untouchable. You cannot laugh too loudly or eat too much. You must always look just a little bit hungry, just a little too perfect. Because if the illusion slips even for a second, the audience begins to remember you're a person. And that ruins everything. Even your private moments aren't private anymore. Servants linger longer than necessary. Patrons send spies disguised as dressmakers and errand boys. Rumours spread that you sleep upright to protect your diaphragm, that you drink only warmed milk, that you wear gloves to bed to keep your fingers soft for signing autographs. You do none of these things, but you don't bother correcting the stories. If they want a fantasy, you'll give them one. It's easier than being real. You begin to notice the way people flinch when you show emotion. Real emotion, not stagecraft, but something raw. Anger, exhaustion, fear. Those things make them uncomfortable. They expect you to be above it, transcendent. You try crying once in front of a trusted patron. Just once. Her face stiffens. She pats your hand and tells you not to be dramatic. As if your life hasn't been one long act. You never cry in front of anyone again. The line between devotion and consumption blurs quickly. One admirer offers to build you a private theatre. Another offers to name a child after you, regardless of its gender. Someone writes a treatise arguing that castrati represent the next phase of human evolution, an artistic ascension beyond base desire. You don't know whether to laugh or scream. You do neither. You smile. You say thank you. You accept the bouquet, the compliment, the gaze that lingers too long. You start to fear silence, not because it's lonely, but because it's when the mask begins to loosen. When you hear your own breathing and realise it's too shallow. When your reflection starts to look tired in ways even makeup can't hide. You try not to look in mirrors when you're alone. Not because you're ashamed, but because you're not sure who you'll see. The person you once were is buried under layers of performance, stitched into brocade and echoed in falsetto. People call you free. You can go where you want, sing when you choose, live in luxury. But freedom is a performance too. You are always being watched, measured, interpreted. You are a phenomenon, not a man. And phenomena don't get to stop, not until the audience moves on. So you keep going. You pose for the portraits, you read the letters, you let yourself be adored, because adoration is the only thing keeping you relevant. You play the part they wrote for you, long before you could read. The angel, the siren, the freak. And when the curtains close, when the fans are gone and the candles have burned low, you sit alone in your chamber, still in costume, and whisper a single question into the empty air, one no one has ever bothered to ask you. Who would I have been if they had let me stay whole? Fame, as it turns out, has an expiration date. Not a sudden collapse, but a slow erosion. The invitations come less frequently. The bouquets shrink. The applause fades by degrees. Still polite, still respectable, but no longer urgent. Your name, once whispered with breathless awe, becomes one of many on the programme. The young sopranos grow bolder. The tenors smirk more freely. You find yourself standing in the same spotlight as always, but it no longer warms you. It simply illuminates how little they see you now. When the Vatican calls, it feels less like a triumph and more like a formal retirement, a final assignment, a ceremonial shelving. You're offered a place in the Sistine Chapel choir, one of the church's oldest and most exalted musical institutions. The invitation is phrased as an honour, and perhaps it is in the way a tomb can be an honour. You accept because what else is there? No opera house will keep you as their centrepiece forever. The church, at least, never forgets its relics. The transition is quieter than you expect. Your wardrobe simplifies. Gone are the jewelled buttons and gilded cloaks. You now wear the robe of the papal choir, a garment meant to erase the self beneath it. You don't mind. After years of being a spectacle, invisibility offers its own strange relief. The Sistine Chapel welcomes you with reverent formality. The other singers nod in your direction, neither cold nor warm. You are not one of them. You are something else. A once golden name, now polished into ritual. The chapel itself is magnificent. You've sung in grand halls, yes, but none like this. The walls are alive with frescoes, every inch a collision of divinity and ego. God watches you from the ceiling. Saints march across the plaster like witnesses. You stand beneath them and sing, not as a performer, but as an offering. The acoustics are sublime. Your voice, now older and darker at the edges, still soars with a purity few can match. But as it rises, you feel something heavy beneath it, something like grief. The hymns you sing are ancient, woven in Latin, thick with incense and penitence. They are not meant to dazzle, they are meant to humble. You no longer sing for nobles or merchants, you sing for God, or for those who believe they speak on his behalf. There is no applause, only the echo of your own voice disappearing into a silence too vast to hold on to. You begin to miss the sound of clapping, not for the praise, but for the proof that someone heard you. Here in this sacred space, you become something both honoured and irrelevant. The church treats you as holy, but not quite alive, a sacred object to be displayed on holy days, polished and placed precisely where the light can catch you. They call you maestro now, a courtesy, a preservation of dignity. But you hear the pause that follows the title, the hesitation before they continue speaking, as if unsure what else to say. You are no longer admired, you are remembered. The other singers keep their distance. They respect you, of course. Your reputation demands it. But respect is not warmth. You share meals in silence. You rehearse beside them without ever being part of them. They have voices strong and faithful, but none like yours. You suspect they resent you for that, or pity you. You're not sure which would be worse. They were never meant to be stars. You were. And now, stripped of the stage, you can't help but feel like a statue placed among the living. Admired, but never touched. You start to notice how little the church speaks of what made you. The sermons are full of purity, of sacrifice, of heavenly sound, but never of knives, never of rooms that smell of vinegar and blood. Your past is rewritten as providence, as if God himself reached into your throat and left a miracle behind. You're not bitter, not exactly, but you do wonder how many people have bowed their heads in prayer while ignoring the price that bought their reverence. Sometimes when you sing alone in the chapel at night, you let the hymns bend slightly, just enough to insert a phrase from an aria long buried, something playful, something human. The frescoes never seem to mind. You like to imagine that even the saints enjoy a bit of theatre now and then. In those moments, your voice feels less like an obligation and more like a memory. Not a tool, not a weapon, just something that once belonged to you. You begin to understand what it means to be a relic. To be sacred, yes, but also static, unchanging. Preserved not for who you are, but for what you represent. You have become a symbol of something the world no longer quite knows how to hold. A bridge to a past that was never as holy as they claim. You start to wonder if the other relics, bones in glass cases, splinters of old crosses, ever felt the way you do now. Revered and forgotten at the same time. There is comfort here in the routine, the prayers, the Latin, the steady rhythm of candles lit and extinguished. You know what to expect each day. You know what to sing, when to rise, when to bow your head. No one asks you to dazzle, no one asks you to smile. You simply show up and give them the sound they expect. In exchange, they give you shelter, food, structure, and silence. More silence than you know what to do with. You tell yourself that this is enough, that it's peace, that it's dignity. But some nights, as you walk the darkened halls alone, you remember the velvet and the stage, the crush of flowers at your feet, the roar of applause so loud it shook your ribs, and you wonder, not with bitterness, but with quiet ache, whether being holy is just another kind of being forgotten. And still you sing, because it's all you've ever known, because even now, even here, your voice can still make the angels pause. Because if you stop, there's nothing left but the silence. And you've lived too long being defined by sound to know what to do without it. You are not entirely alone. There are others like you, other voices, other bodies shaped by the same decision, the same absence. You recognize them immediately, even before they speak. There's something in the way they carry themselves, the way they walk with both grace and caution, always measured, always aware of the space they occupy. You see it in their eyes too, sharp and a little tired, like mirrors that have reflected too much admiration and not enough understanding. You dine together often, seated at the same long tables, dressed in similar robes, sipping the same watered wine. You exchange pleasantries, you laugh. Sometimes you even tease one another, the way people do when they want to feel normal. You make jokes about your shared predicament, dry little barbs that never land too deeply. We're half-price men with full-price voices, one of them quips, and the others chuckle in that brittle way that acknowledges both the wit and the wound. No one pushes the laughter too far. It is understood that beneath the jokes lies something best left untouched. You talk about technique, repertoire, audiences. You discuss phrasing like it's politics, ornamentation like it's theology. You gossip about patrons, roll your eyes at critics, argue over who sang which aria better. But you don't talk about the knife. No one ever talks about the knife. Not directly, not in words. You might say, when it happened, or after the operation. But even those phrases are rare. You all know. You all remember. There's no need to speak it aloud, and every reason not to. The silence around that subject becomes its own kind of language, a shared agreement as binding as a contract. You know who cried afterward, who didn't, who still sleeps badly, who doesn't sleep at all. You learn to read it in the way they hold their shoulders, in the tension behind their smiles. You become fluent in omissions, expert in deflection. It's a peculiar intimacy, one based on mutual avoidance rather than mutual confession. Still, there's comfort in their presence, a rare kind of ease. With them, you are not strange. You don't have to explain why your voice is the way it is, why your hands move the way they do. You don't have to worry about being stared at like an exhibit. Among them, you're not a curiosity. You're just another version of the same compromise, a slightly different harmony in a shared and complicated chord. But closeness has limits. Real intimacy, physical, emotional, unguarded, is something you all circle carefully, like a flame that burns too easily. You embrace occasionally in public when a performance goes well or a patron dies unexpectedly. You place hands on shoulders, exchange cheek kisses at the holidays. These gestures are warm but brief. Nothing lingers, nothing clings. You've all been taught in different ways that touch is dangerous, that affection can be mistaken, that desire is best left to others. You have never fallen in love, at least not in a way that anyone would call practical. You've been fascinated, yes. You've admired. You've watched someone's fingers on a harpsichord and imagined what they might feel like tangled with yours. But those thoughts arrive like intruders, uninvited and unwelcome. They fade before they take root. Because love, as you've observed it, requires a kind of vulnerability you were never allowed to develop. You can give beauty, you can inspire it, but you cannot receive it without suspicion. Some of the others have tried. There are whispered stories of castrati who kept lovers in secret, quiet affairs with footmen, seamstresses, distant cousins, but they always end the same way, with scandal, with dismissal, with sudden disappearances no one explains. You learn quickly that your reputation is fragile. One rumour can shatter the delicate glass dome you live beneath, and so most of you choose safety, solitude dressed as professionalism, distance disguised as discipline. You become masters of redirection. When asked if you're lonely, you quote poetry. When asked about love, you change the subject to music. You let the world believe that your art is so consuming that it leaves no room for anything else. And perhaps, in a way, it does. Not because it fills you, but because it's the only thing you've ever been taught to trust. Art doesn't betray you. It doesn't whisper behind fans. It doesn't flinch at your touch. Over time, you begin to wonder if your heart has simply adapted to your reality, grown quieter, smaller, more discreet. You feel affection, certainly. Deep, abiding affection for your fellow castrati. You look out for them. You defend them. You grieve for them when they vanish from the stage, and no one asks why. But that affection is channeled into music, into shared glances across rehearsal rooms, into duets sung too beautifully to be purely professional. You let your love bleed into the harmony and hope that someone, somewhere, hears what you can't say. Sometimes, late at night, you sit beside one of them, just close enough to feel the heat of another body. You talk about nothing, about food, about patrons, about the absurdity of powdered wigs. And in those moments you feel something that almost resembles peace. Almost, but it always passes. One of you yawns, the other stands. You say goodnight and return to separate beds in separate rooms. Because even in your closest relationships, there is always that line, that edge, that silence. Your world is filled with sound. Music surrounds you, fills you, defines you. But it is also a world profoundly quiet when it comes to being held. You are never touched with urgency, never kissed with intent, never embraced like someone whose absence would matter. You've learned to live with that, to carry your body like an instrument and your heart like a rumour, unproven, unspoken, always half believed. And so you keep laughing with them, singing with them, walking beside them through courtyards and cathedrals, joking about your shared absurdity while carefully stepping around the sorrow that hums beneath every note. You are not alone, but you are not quite known either. You exist together, apart, bound not by intimacy, but by the same wound hidden under different costumes. A chorus of angels, each alone in their silence, singing in perfect unbroken harmony. Age doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in sideways, testing the edges of your body before making itself known. First, it's the stiffness in your knees after rehearsals, then the slow, creeping ache in your lower back that doesn't go away with rest. You start waking in the middle of the night, not from dreams, but from the dull throb of joints that no longer enjoy sleep. At first, you dismiss it. You've always been disciplined. You assume it's just fatigue. But fatigue becomes your baseline, and then your excuse, and then just part of who you are. Your skeleton, elongated and strange since youth, becomes less a frame and more a burden. The ribs that once expanded to power your endless breath now feel brittle. Your spine, stretched and trained into elegant posture, begins to protest every movement. The long limbs that once gave you a dancer's grace now drag behind your intentions. You move more slowly now, not for effect, but because you have to. You're still tall, still striking in silhouette, but you no longer glide. You shift. You favour one side. You ache in places you can't name. No one prepared you for this. There is no guide for what happens to a castrato at 50. The medical books are silent. The priests are silent. Even your companions, if any remain, are silent. Some died young. Some vanished into obscurity. You've begun to suspect that part of the reason so few of you live long lives is that no one knows how to care for the bodies you are left with. You were built for performance, not endurance. You were crafted, not grown. And now, the flaws in your construction are catching up to you. Your breathing changes. Not your technique, that remains immaculate, but the capacity, the strength behind it. You find yourself needing more time between phrases. Your lungs feel tighter, like they've shrunk while you weren't looking. There are days when climbing stairs leaves you winded, not because you're unfit, but because the body that once powered cathedral-filling sound is simply running out of fuel. You've built a career on the illusion of effortlessness, and now you must spend twice the energy just to keep the illusion intact. You begin to notice fat settling in unfamiliar places, softness where there should be tone, a roundness to your face that no longer suits the stage. It is not weight gain exactly, it's redistribution. A strange rearrangement of what little your body was allowed to become. Your shoulders narrow further, your waist thickens, your thighs ache, even when you've done nothing. You look at yourself in the mirror and see someone who's being reshaped by time into something even less recognizable. Osteoporosis sets in quietly. You don't notice until the pain becomes specific. Your hips after long rehearsals, your wrists when you lift sheet music, your neck when you bow too quickly. Your doctors offer little advice. They treat you like a novelty, unsure whether to prescribe the same things they'd offer to women or men. You're neither. You're both. You're a category they were never trained to understand. They prod and prescribe, but you leave every visit feeling more like a specimen than a patient. Your singing voice somehow endures. It's weathered at the edges, softened like parchment, but still unmistakably yours. People still marvel. They still call it otherworldly. But you know the truth. The control is harder now. Each performance is a negotiation with your body. Each note costs more. The joy of singing has been replaced by the discipline of survival. You sing because you must, because it's all you've ever done, because the silence that would replace it feels like a kind of death. The costumes no longer fit as they used to. You wear darker colours now, partly to hide the sweat, partly to appear slimmer, partly because no one expects aging angels to wear pastels. Your shoes are softer, your robes looser. You begin to favour shawls and cloaks, not for drama, but for warmth. Your fingers cramp in winter, your ankles swell in summer, and through it all you're expected to remain graceful, to glide, to bow, to float like a cymbal, untouched by time. Backstage, the newer singers call you maestro with a mix of reverence and pity. You hear the whisper of your own name spoken in past tense. He was the finest. He had such clarity. You're still alive, still singing, still here, but they speak as though your legend has already outlived you, and perhaps it has, perhaps it always would. You no longer travel much. The roads are too hard on your joints, the beds in strange cities too unforgiving. You accept fewer engagements. You choose performances where you can stand still, sing seated, or appear only briefly. You avoid roles that require movement. You refuse invitations that come with expectations of charm. Your voice remains, but the rest of you is slowing beyond what even music can mask. In private moments, you wonder what it might have felt like to age naturally, to go through the common aches and indignities of time with a body that made sense, to wake with a sore back and not have to explain to a physician that you were surgically altered as a child, to grow old as a man, or even as a failed one, instead of as something unnatural, some artifact of an era that no longer knows what to do with you. You're not bitter, not exactly. Bitterness requires energy you no longer have. What you feel is closer to fatigue, a quiet resignation to the fact that your body was always a temporary arrangement, a fragile scaffolding designed for sound. Not longevity. You were never built to last, only to astonish. And you did. You still do. But now you count your victories in days without pain, in nights where sleep comes without medication, in the brief, rare hours when your reflection doesn't feel like a warning. And so you carry on. You dress carefully, you warm up slowly, you smile when people call you a legend, even as your knees crack beneath your robe. You take your place before the altar, or the orchestra, or the echoing theatre wall, and you sing. Not for applause, not for God, not even for yourself. You sing because silence still feels worse. You sing because your body, however broken, still remembers how. And when you finish, when the final note fades and the room holds its breath, you bow, slowly, carefully, not out of humility, out of necessity. You rise again with effort, and you remind them, just by standing there, that you are not a ghost. Not yet. When you look back, what you remember first are the surfaces, the shimmer of silk, the gleam of polished marble beneath your feet, the weight of gold-trimmed garments, heavy not just with embroidery, but with expectation. You lived in rooms painted with cherubs and saints, dined from plates rimmed in silver, slept on sheets that smelled faintly of rose water and starch. You were surrounded by beauty, curated, refined, and ever so slightly suffocating. It looked like luxury, and perhaps it was, but it was never yours. You moved through palaces and opera houses like a guest in someone else's dream. Applause followed you like perfume, clinging long after you'd left the room. People bowed, they wept, they threw flowers at your feet, they praised your tone, your purity, your restraint, but they never praised your personhood. They loved the sound you made, the illusion you cast. They adored the product, the performance, the artifact, not the you that existed underneath it all. That part remained invisible, even as your voice filled entire cathedrals. You were seen, but not known, admired, but not understood. Everything that made you singular was the result of something taken. The world called your suffering divine, a necessary sacrifice for art, a holy wound. They said your voice was proof that beauty could come from pain, that heaven could be reached if someone else paid the price. And you smiled because what else could you do? You smiled while they called you angel, miracle, chimera. You smiled while they made a myth out of your silence. The worst part wasn't the lie. It was the fact that everyone believed it, that the very people who could have protected you were the ones who held the blade. Not physically, perhaps, but in every decision that led to that table, that room, that moment. Your parents, your priest, the teachers, the doctors, they all agreed, quietly or aloud, that you were better off this way, that your voice, your gift, your brilliance was more important than anything that might have been lost along the way. And so you learned to believe it too. You had to. Otherwise, you wouldn't have survived. You told yourself you were chosen, not broken, that your pain had purpose, that your loneliness was holy. It worked mostly, long enough to get through the lessons, the performances, the years, long enough to make the applause feel like comfort instead of a transaction. But deep down, beneath the velvet and the powdered wigs, you were still that child from the village, still holding your father's hand, still waiting to go home. But there was no home to return to. Not really. not for what you'd become. You couldn't go back to being a son. You weren't made to be a husband. You couldn't vanish into anonymity like other men. Couldn't retire to a quiet life without your voice becoming the loudest thing in the room. So you stayed. You remained visible, on stages, in choirs, at royal tables. They kept inviting you, kept praising you, kept pretending you were lucky. You were admired by the powerful, envied by your peers, whispered about in salons and journals. And yet, when you needed someone, truly needed someone, there was no one to call. Not a lover, not a family of your own, not even a friend who understood all the words you couldn't say aloud. You had wealth, yes, comfort, recognition, but intimacy was always out of reach. Like a high note you could hear, but not hit. You learned to live without it, the way others learned to live without sunlight. And still, you sang. That was the paradox. You sang with your whole self, even when that self had been carved apart. You gave the world what it demanded: beauty, grace, transcendence. They took it from you with eager hands, then asked for more. You were a well they never expected to run dry, a voice that was supposed to last forever. No one asked what happened when the music stopped. No one wanted to imagine you outside of the aria. You were never allowed to grow old in the same way others did. Age made you less magical, less marketable. You went from marvel to memory in the space of a few seasons. People still spoke your name, but now it came paired with qualifiers. Once great, once extraordinary. You became a footnote in your own life, living among the echoes of your past brilliance. And through it all, you remained polite, composed, grateful. Because what else was there to be? You don't regret it, exactly. Regret requires the belief that another path was possible. You're not sure that it was. Maybe, if you had stayed in that village, you'd have died in obscurity, or lived a life of drudgery and hunger. But at least that life would have been yours. Instead, you were transformed into something greater, and in the process, something smaller. Your legacy expanded while yourself slowly diminished, like a candle that burns brighter just before it goes out. You wonder sometimes if anyone ever really knew you, not the singer, not the spectacle, but the person, the one who watched storms through chapel windows, the one who held his breath before every performance, the one who once dreamed of something as simple as being kissed without calculation. If someone did know him, they never said. They loved the version of you that sang, bowed, dazzled, but the rest was left untouched, unacknowledged, undesired. And yet, in that silence, you endured. You survived longer than they expected, loved more than they understood, gave more than they ever asked for. You were their angel, yes, but you were also their evidence. That suffering could be beautiful, that bodies could be bent to serve art, that the price could be paid by someone else, as long as the result was sublime. You learned to find small freedoms where you could. A private laugh with another castrato, a single night of sleep without pain, a letter you wrote and never sent. You built a quiet rebellion in your solitude, a small reminder that even within a beautiful prison, you were still a person. A voice, yes, but also a mind, a memory, a child who grew into something impossible and lived to tell the tale. And now, as you sit in the hush between concerts, no longer centre stage, no longer pursued, you finally begin to understand the shape of your life. Not tragic, not divine, just strange, singular, yours. You were a boy who never became a man who never got to be a boy. And somehow, through all of it, you kept singing. Time eventually forgets everyone, but it forgets you a little differently, not with indifference, but with discomfort. The world doesn't just move on from you, it quietly brushes you aside. The fashion changes. The appetite for the extraordinary begins to wither. Audiences who once wept at your voice now crave something else, something closer to earth. The mystique that made you famous becomes an inconvenience. a relic of taste, not talent. Realism becomes the new religion. Opera stages shift toward grittier stories, more human ones. Tenors rise to take the roles you once transformed. Their voices crack, swell, rage with emotion, imperfect but relatable. Their flaws are the point. Sopranos reclaim their crowns, their roles, their voices. Women who were once barred from stages you gilded now stride across them with power, and rightly so. You do not resent them. You never did. But you do watch from the shadows and wonder what it feels like to be welcomed into the thing that once excluded you for being too strange, too exceptional, too unlike anything else. The invitations stop coming. Not rudely, just gradually. Fewer performances, then none. A polite note, a final concert, a curtain call that no one announces as the last, but that you know is final all the same. You bow, you smile, you step away, you take your place in the audience of your own life, and wait to see what will happen next. Nothing happens next. No statues are built in your honour. No compositions bear your name. A few programmes perhaps, tucked in drawers. A painted miniature fading on a forgotten parlour wall. No heirs carry your legacy forward. Not because you didn't want them, but because you couldn't have them. You leave behind no children, no lineage, no inheritance, but the memory of a sound that no longer echoes anywhere. The world, which once bent to your breath, now spins without pause, and you learn what it means to be truly quiet. The voice, once your currency, begins to fade. Not suddenly, but piece by piece, your range shortens, your strength wanes. You sing in private, now and then, but the sound is thin, wispy at the edges, like fog curling through fingers. You don't record it, you never had the chance. The technology came too late, or you aged too early. Either way, no trace remains. No ghost in wax, no echo in shellac. You existed in an age of sound, without memory. When you're gone, the voice goes with you. You become a curiosity, a name in a book, a footnote in someone else's dissertation. They say the castrati, as if you were plural even in your solitude, a category, a cautionary tale, an experiment in beauty that veered too close to cruelty. You are written about, but not mourned, an academic concept, a strange detail in the history of music. Few mention your name, fewer speak it aloud. You're not entirely erased. Some mention your performances in passing, or stumble across a yellowed pamphlet with your face on it. They marvel, they raise eyebrows, they say, "Can you imagine?" And then they turn the page, because imagining you is uncomfortable. You don't fit easily into any story they want to tell. Not the tragic one, not the heroic one. You are too complex for simplification, too compromised for nostalgia. They prefer to forget you with reverence, which is just forgetting with nicer lighting. You live out your final years in a house with too many mirrors, not because you like them, but because no one bothered to remove them. You stop looking into them eventually. The reflection is too unfamiliar. The face is no longer the one that graced posters and drew gasps. It's softer, paler, thinner, a face carved by time but untouched by certain kinds of aging. You look too young in some ways, too old in others. People who pass you on the street glance once, then look away quickly. The discomfort hasn't gone away. It has simply aged with you. You write letters you don't send. You reread old notes from patrons long dead. You hum arias to yourself in the bath, careful not to sing too loudly. It would be strange now for your neighbours to hear that sound from behind the wall. A voice not quite male, not quite young, floating through the plaster like a ghost who hasn't noticed it died. You keep your windows closed. You keep your memories folded like garments in a drawer you rarely open. Occasionally, someone asks about your past. A curious visitor, a young singer, a distant relative of someone you once performed for. They ask about your voice, your fame, your gowns. They ask with awe but without depth. You answer politely. You leave out the details that matter. You smile when they compliment your grace. You pretend you've forgotten the pain, because the truth would only make them uncomfortable. They don't want the full story, just the outline, the legend without the wound. In death at last there is no audience, no candles flicker in approval, no curtains rise, no voices whisper behind lace and linen. You are not watched anymore, not weighed, not studied, not adored. You are simply gone. The world with its shifting fashions and hungers has already moved past you. It has new names to praise, new voices to chase, and you are no longer a part of its performance. For the first time in your life, you are allowed to disappear. Your grave is modest. Perhaps it bears your name. Perhaps not. Perhaps the stone has been worn smooth by weather and time. The letters now, just faint suggestions of who you were. You are buried not beneath a statue or a stained glass window, but beneath the sky, where no one can mistake you for anything other than human. There are no mourners who knew your childhood laugh, no lovers to weep over memories of your touch. But someone may pass by, pause and wonder who you were. And in that small moment, you are known again. It is a strange kind of peace. You are no longer expected to inspire, no longer asked to be beautiful, strange, flawless. No one watches the way your hands move. No one listens for perfection. There is no stage, no robe, no script. The pressure has lifted. The silence which once terrified you now wraps around you like a soft cloak. It is not empty. It is full of the things you no longer have to explain. You are not a symbol anymore. You are just stillness. You think perhaps that this is what you always wanted, not the luxury, not the applause, just this, the freedom not to be looked at, to be left alone, to let the body finally fall into its natural rhythm, even if that rhythm is nothing more than the steady return to earth. You spent your entire life performing. Even when you were off stage, you were acting, smiling, bowing, floating. Now you do nothing, and no one expects otherwise. What remains of you is not what people hope to preserve. Your name, if remembered at all, is mispronounced. Your voice never recorded lingers only in unreliable descriptions and half-written reviews. A phrase here, a note there. Otherworldly. Uncanny. He sang like light. No one says who you were before the stage. No one records your favourite meal, the way you once picked at bread while watching birds from your window. That was never part of the legend. But you remember all you did. In those final quiet years, when your hands began to tremble and your knees refused to hold their shape, you had time to think. Time to recall the village you came from. The faces of your parents, blurry now, but still warm. The feeling of mud between your toes as a child. The first time someone called your voice a miracle, and you believed them. Not because it felt true, but because you needed something to believe. You remember what it felt like to be held only once, briefly, by another Castrato in a moment of silent grief. Neither of you spoke. Neither of you needed to. You shared a lifetime of understanding in that touch. You both knew what it meant to be adored but untouched, to be seen but never held. That one embrace was the most honest performance you ever gave, and now you rest. No more arias, no more sacred rituals or velvet prisons. The body they reshaped is gone, returned to dust, to something neutral, nameless. The voice that defied nature has dissolved into memory. But you, whatever that word truly meant, have finally stopped being an instrument. You are not a relic, not a saint, not a mistake. You are not divine, you are not monstrous. You are simply a boy who wanted to sing, and a man who learned how to survive in a world that asked too much. You were built into something extraordinary, but at the cost of something ordinary. And it's that ordinary part, the one no one saw, the one you had to protect from everyone else, that feels the most precious now. Let them call you what they will. Let the historians bicker over definitions. Let the critics write their footnotes. None of it matters anymore. What matters is that, for a little while, you were here. You left sound behind, Not in recordings, not in etchings, but in the way people paused to listen, in the breath held between phrases, in the hush that followed your final note. You were a song, not just the singer, not just the body, not just the voice, a fleeting composition made of breath, blood, sacrifice, and sound. A nightingale stitched into velvet, a candle lit at both ends, and like all music you were meant to end. Sleep now, rest, no one is watching, no one is asking for encores. The silence that frightened you is gentle now. It isn't erasure, it's release. You are free. That brings us to the end of tonight's story, not of glory or defiance, but of beauty shaped by absence. If you're still awake, thank you for listening to a life lived in falsetto, where silence was never a choice, only a reward at the end. The castrati, praised, pitied, and performed into legend, were never just voices. They were people, held in place by applause too loud to escape. If you'd like early access to more stories like this, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. You can also like, subscribe, or leave a comment sharing what overlooked life you'd like to drift through next. Sleep well.